We're official.
We're official.
Well, welcome everybody. This is particularly exciting for me because you know, as Nick mentioned, you know, we're good buddies. I've been a friend and a fan of Nick's for about 25 years now, and over the years we've explored. Well, of course, we have many common interests, both in hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, and just, I think, personal growth in general. We're both on a path of conscious evolution, and we like to get together and talk about, you know, various, we'll pick a topic and really get into the depth of it, the nuance, the subtleties of different distinctions and so on. And it's been a really wonderful journey. And I've been blessed to, I've purchased and read every single one of Nick's books, although I can't claim all the way through every single one.
If you did, you'd probably be the only one.
But this one I'm particularly excited about because it's a little different structure and everything. And so I think it's, I'm really grateful to be a part of this book launch for Nick. And as he mentioned, we do these creative collaboration calls and we invite people in to explore ideas. So this one is a kind of an expanded version of that. And it's so wonderful to have you all here. So Nick, you know, tell us, before we get actually to the book itself, would you tell us a little bit more about your background? How did you get into the arena of personal growth and development, and then eventually into poetry?
Yeah, you know, actually I wasn't expecting that question in that form, but what's great about it is that I remember when I was in high school, I had a good friend of mine who, in fact, was my best friend through all of high school, and he was dating his girlfriend through all of high school. So Rich and Monica. Rich was dating Monica. Rich was totally in love with Monica, and Monica totally in love with Rich. But as they neared graduation, Rich was ready to get married, go out, you know, have the house with the white picket fence, you know, cat and dog, grow old together, have grandchildren. And Monica could not imagine launching into that life without living first some. She needed to go out and explore. And so she came to Rich and told him she couldn't marry him, and broke up with him. And he was totally devastated. And I remember there were 2 weeks when Rich came over to my house almost every day or connected with me, and he was just bawling his eyes out. His whole future was gone. And at the time, I felt helpless to help him. I didn't really know what to do except give him a shoulder to cry on. And that really inspired me to go into the whole arena of psychology. And you know, I studied, did my undergraduate degree in psychology and social welfare, went on to my master's degree in rehabilitation administration, so developing programs primarily for psychiatric patients. And then eventually into NLP and hypnotherapy, which became my career. And interestingly enough, as a kind of side track with that, I loved to write poetry when I was young. And I wrote lots of poems, and then maybe a few years into my career, I stopped writing much poetry. So I kind of put it by the wayside, but I became very interested in the use of language as a change tool. And so especially with the work of Milton Erickson, those of you who haven't heard of him, he's an amazing man who passed away in 1980, was a psychiatrist and a hypnotherapist, and he was known for his elegant use of language to help people make shifts and changes. And what I didn't realize at the time was all this work with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and with hypnotherapy and the language of change would actually become a very powerful tool in writing poetry. And so
You know,
all these threads kind of came together in recent years as the Transformational Poet.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, one of the things when we first started training together at Anchor Point, that was one of the things that I really admired about you and wanted to model was your use of language, how you were very, very skillful at not only the precision of language, but the artistry of it. And that was something that really impressed me and something that I really wanted to model. And you mentioned transformational poetry. And that's something that I think is really something very unique to you, and your unique blend of, as you mentioned, like the NLP and Ericksonian language with the artistry of poetry, and thus you've become the transformational poet. Tell us a bit more about what transformational poetry means. What is that for you?
Yeah, since I've been in the field of personal development pretty much my whole life, really all of that is about how we can manage the transformations that we're naturally going to go through in life. So we're evolving beings. If we're the same as we were when we were young, there's something wrong with that picture. We need to be evolving. And so for me, life is transformational. I remember one time I was talking to a good friend of mine and I was telling him I was going through a transition, and he leaned over to me and he said, "Nick, when have you not been in a transition?" And I think I've tried to live that from that place of being more a constantly evolving person rather than trying to lock myself too much into any particular frame or idea. So I think of transformational poetry as poetry that helps us connect more deeply with our heart, to take the steps on our own soulful journey in life, to navigate through the challenges of life, both ethically and with as much integrity as we can, but also as an invitation for us to go beyond where we were before, to kind of step beyond our previous limits. I can't say that I've always been good at that or even manage that well myself. And I think that's part of being human. We stumble our way as best we can and we make the most of our life. And ideally we'll come to a place when, we're taking our last breath that we can look back on it all and say, yes, I lived a beautiful life. And to me, that's really the goal, to be able to look back and say, I lived a beautiful life. I may have made mistakes. I may have fallen on my face, but I lived a beautiful life.
Nice. I love that. And, it's one of the things that I can't remember how many years ago you started sharing with me in our creative collaboration calls about your this process of wording the world as part of how you generate this magnificent poetry, as you have a very specific process for doing it, and this idea of bearing witness to our experience. Can you tell me a little bit more about your process, wording the world and bearing witness?
Yeah, as I was writing my poetry, I began at some point along the way to kind of model myself, so to speak. Notice what I did to produce poetry. And notice there was some very common, relatively consistent steps. And the first one, so there are 5 steps. The first one was presence, bring myself into the present, sort of connect with myself in the moment and with the world in the moment. A lot of poems are stimulated by, you could say, prompts from the world around us, things we see, things we hear, things we feel, as well as things we might notice going on inside of us. So the first step was presence. Second step, since our attention is constantly wavering in the world, there was research done by I believe it was Google, that found out that the average attention span for a human, if we're not trying to focus our attention, the average attention span is 8 seconds. And we're actually beat out by goldfish who make it in at 9 seconds. So our attention is naturally distracted. We have to choose to engage with something. So the second step is engagement. You find something in the world or in life that speaks to you, or you connect with, or it captures your attention. And then you begin to interact with that. So for me, that might include just descriptions of that. Like I noticed the colors of it or the shapes of it. It might just initially be sensory descriptions. The third step is what I call reflection, which has 2 parts to it. So first part of reflection is taking the thing I'm noticing into me, as if I'm living it inside. So mirroring it in a way. So I think all of us, and NLP, it has this assumption that we represent the world inside of us. And in a way, it's taking the thing we're connecting to and representing it inside of us, which might mean that I notice what it feels like. I might imagine becoming it. I might feel the shape of it. So I take it in and kind of experience it from the inside out. So that's the first reflection. You're just kind of taking it on, taking it in. The second reflection is when you begin to explore, well, what does this mean to me? Or what does this tell me? Or what is this reminding me about in my own life or in my own history or in the world? Or what's this a metaphor for? And so all those questions are kind of in the back of my mind that can move from one line to another line, or move through the process of creation from one step to another. And that second reflection can go on for a long time. You could take something with you and be gradually reflecting on it for, minutes, hours, weeks, even months, maybe even a lifetime. You can have a question that you ponder over a lifetime. That is what I would call a quest. So that's the third step, is reflection. Fourth step is cultivation. You start to take whatever you have and you craft it into something. Could be a painting, could be a dance. For me, it's typically a poem. So you begin to craft it into something, which would include editing. And the last is expression. You bring it back out to the world. And then that cycle can be repeated in different iterations. So you can start with something, you notice it, you engage with it, you reflect on it, you cultivate it a little bit, you express something, then that brings it back again to a new cycle of kind of oftentimes more reflection and cultivation, and eventually to something you might be happy with. And I call that process bearing witness, because I believe it's the way we transform experience into wisdom. When we bear witness to life, we're in that soulful engagement, we actually transform our experience into wisdom.
Nice. I love the process, and you actually teach an entire workshop on the bearing witness and wording the world. And I've been blessed to invite you up to Oregon here, and we've had that workshop here a couple of times, and I think it's super valuable. I like its simplicity and its elegance. I love things that I can carry around in my head that help me interpret and give meaning to things in useful ways. And that has been a really helpful one for me. So this particular book, The Undiscovered Country, Living in Your Own Heartland, the title itself is super intriguing to me. Just the mere suggestion of a heartland as a kind of inner landscape, which you talk a lot about in the book. And it's a really, neat way of thinking about it. So what inspired you to write this particular book? I know it's got a little different structure. It's both a workbook and a collection of poetry and prose and so on. So a little different than your previous works. This is your 8th book. And so again, what inspired you to write it?
Well, actually, there are probably 2 threads that contributed to it. So one, excuse me, I'd been teaching a hypnotherapy class in China for about 15 years in a very structured format, very skill-based, starting with really simple skills and building to more powerful skills. It was a 12-day program. And 2017, I went to deliver the class, was talking with a sponsor, and out of this conversation came a challenge to revamp the class. And the class was great, everybody loved it, but we were talking and this possibility came up. And, being a person who likes to take on challenges, that night, literally the next morning, I was to start the 12-day class. That night, I started pondering, well, if I were to revamp this class, what would I do with it? And out of that came this model that I call a map of the archetypal journey. I started thinking about, there's the outer world and the inner world. There's the known and the unknown, and this created a map with 4 quadrants that I believe have perennial questions that all of us as, spirits in life, as human beings trying to traverse this experience called life, have to address in some way or another, and often have to revisit many times in our life. So the 4 quadrants, based on that, are, you take the known, the unknown, the outer world, the inner world, the known and the unknown. You have the known inner world, which is the philosophical question, who are you? And the poetic question is, how wide is your embrace for your life, for yourself? It's really about self-acceptance, being able to come to a place of a relationship with yourself. You could even say a kind of loving relationship with yourself. And for me, that's because I think primarily of my work with the unconscious, that's really a really profound and deep area for us to explore, because we really do not know ourselves for the most part. There's lots of research that indicates that. One of my favorite books is called Strangers to Ourselves by Timothy Wilson. And he talked all about the research that indicates other people will actually be able to predict our behavior more accurately than we will ourselves in many contexts. And all the evidence is about 95% of our processing is unconscious. So the question really is, how wide is your embrace for your life? And for all those things that go on inside of you that you may not like, or that you may be aware of, but you're not sure how to handle them, both your grace, your strength, your dignity, as well as what you might call your shadow side. And then there's the unknown inner world, which is the philosophical question, where do you come from, or what is your source? And for me, this is about your ability. The poetic question is, how deep is your taproot of trust in life? How willing are you to trust life? So it's about building up your intuition, being able to have faith and trust that things will work out somehow or other, or you'll be able to handle them if they don't somehow or other. And then there's the known outer world, which is the philosophical question, what matters? You know, what's important really? And the poetic question is the horizon you envision for yourself big enough to hold your dreams? And that horizon is your beliefs, your ideas you've formed about life. And if those are limiting, you could dream big, but you will not be able to accomplish it because your horizon is too small for it. So that's about being able to dance with your limiting beliefs and find a way that you can either overcome them or get through them or merge them into something that becomes a powerful force to move forward. And then there's the unknown outer world, which is the philosophical question of, why are you here? What are you here to do? And the poetic question is, how far are you willing to extend the reach of your heart into life? How far are you willing to bring yourself into contact with life and deliver whatever gifts you have that are uniquely your own to life? So the book is structured around those 4 areas. Each area, there's like 3 tasks I have in it, and then there are poems in each of those, associated with each of those tasks, with questions to answer and writing prompts. So it's both a workbook. For those who are writers, it's a book of writing prompts. And then for poetry lovers, it's a book of poetry, or all 3.
Well, you know, it's, I really, there were certain pieces, I'm about halfway through the book. As soon as Nick put it up on Amazon, I was on it, just downloaded it the same day. And about halfway through, and I'm really enjoying, one of the things that I really appreciate about your work is that you often reveal a little bit of yourself in the books, you know, and your journey and the insights and realizations that you've gathered along the way. And I really liked your exploration of like shallow versus deep roots, and this idea of where do you source from? You know, what gives you life? What gives you energy? What are the kind of the daily practices that you do? And so that one really touched me, something that I'm looking at, you know, what do I source from? And I take these daily walks, I call them medicine walks, where it's a kind of walking meditation, and I do prayers and affirmations and things for myself. But you also talk about something that really I'm really pondering, is this idea of shallow versus deep truth. And the difference between, as you mentioned in the book, shallow truths, that's usually an either or. Either this is true or that's true. And sometimes that can be a source of conflict if you're, you know, interacting with somebody who has a different set of ideas or beliefs. But then there's the deep truths where it's both and. It's more of a paradox where both are true simultaneously. So I've been kind of exploring that as well. And the writing prompts have got me, got the wheels turning and so on. So I really appreciate the workbook side of it. So I would imagine, I don't know if you're ready to share some pieces from the book. We would love to hear some selections.
Yeah, actually, I'll share something that goes in the introduction of the book. So before I launch into the whole map of the archetypal journey, there's an introductory part. And you know, a lot of times when I'm writing, there's the prose writing, which is more explanatory or more descriptive. And then there's poetry, which is more metaphoric. And then there's the bridge between the two, which is kind of like prose poetry. And often in these introductory sections in the book, there's a part of it that's more actual prose, but then there's a part that's more like prose poetry and poetry. And I'm going to read what came to me. And a lot of times these things kind of come to me almost as a piece, not always all as a piece, but mostly formed, which I felt totally blessed by, almost like it's channeled through me. And this is what came when I was writing the introduction to the book. It's called An Invitation for Your Eyes Only. Imagine you found, tucked into your pocket, a folded note, dated today. The words, "For your eyes only," on the outer fold, written by your own hand in the uncanny ink of déjà vu. And you felt in that moment, snaking up your spine, a hair-raising shiver of deep knowing that you have lived all this before. Would your heart race with dread and anticipation at the message you crafted for yourself, wondering, is it a warning, an invitation, a grief, a gift? Would your mind wander back to those days when you felt anxious at the letterbox, hesitant at the ring because you lived your life waiting for the other shoe to drop? Or would you feel swept up into a realm of wonder, like the child you once were, bursting with unimaginable joy and the can't wait eagerness to rip open a wrapped gift or walk through the Disney gates into a magical adventure? And this little note held in your hands holds the keys to the moment, opens a portal to the dream gate you have always wished to find, offers you a ticket to a secret destination. Like all good wish crafters, deep down you know it lives within you. You know what you will get rises from your own depths, so take all the time you need to set your house in order, to list the things you love. Excuse me, I just lost my place. To list the things you love, knowing there is no allowance for baggage because you can only take what you can carry in your own pocket, in your own heart. This is your ticket to the undiscovered country, to the wonderland within you where you enter the secret chamber of your desire. Look into the window on the magic land of your becoming. Step through the doorway onto the ground of your belonging. You are about to immerse yourself in the poetry of life, flooded with new memories as if you have always lived free. Looking back, you see all your joys and sorrows, all your suffering and celebrating, as chords in a song of haunting allure and mystic dazzle. Your life set to music, your body indulging in every nuanced sensation with rapture. You hold all this and more in your hands, tucked in the folds of a note tagged "For Your Eyes Only," because you know that what you see is what you get, and every story you tell expresses the heart in the telling. Now you can begin to apprentice yourself to the telling and the untelling of the deep stories that you live by. Deep stories. And then there are the deep stories, the ones we cannot tell except by living them. But to untell them, that is the pregnancy of a miracle. Don't wait for the water to break. Learn to breathe and push your love out to the world, and one day be blessed with what you deliver. And then there are the deep stories, the ones we cannot tell except by living them. But to untell them, that is the pregnancy of a miracle. Don't wait for the water to break. Learn to breathe and push your love out to the world, and one day be blessed with what you deliver.
Beautiful.
For me, that's
Nick,
what,
I have to say, one of the many things that I admire about your work is there's, for me, a very different experience reading your poetry versus you reading your poetry. When it comes through you, I get so much more out of it hearing it, and you're wonderfully generous on your website that you'll often share your poems not only in the written form but as an audio recording of your you reading it, and I really appreciate that because I know the depth of it comes through the way in your pausing and the nuance and the emphasis. And so I just wanted to point that out, that I really appreciate that aspect.
well,
So
thank you.
more, please, more, please.
Yeah. Actually, an interesting comment on that. There are many times, and some of you who have written poetry might have had this experience. There are many times I'll write a poem, and I don't even really know the power of that poem myself for a period of time. A good example of that is, I'm not sure if it's in this book, but I'll share this poem with you. It's the poem "We Are Messengers." It's a fairly short poem, but I wrote this poem, "We Are Messengers," 6 months before my mother passed away. And then at her funeral, I shared this poem. And it was then that I realized what this poem was really about. So it's called We Are Messengers. We may leave our footprints on the earth, but we walk in heaven. Our light shines farther than our own vision. Our words sink deeper than our own wisdom. We teach what you have lived before does not determine who you may become. And we are learning to live a simple truth of the heart. What we see in others, we awaken in ourselves. We become what we give to the world. And so there I was in that moment, sharing that poem, looking around the room at all the people my mother had touched and who had touched her. And I felt more powerfully than I'd ever felt before her presence. I'm almost going to cry. Her presence in that moment. And that's when I realized the beauty of that poem. We become what we give to the world. You know, and to me, that challenges me to bring my best as much as I can to the world, because that's what I become. I think each of us has a kind of gift, you know, and if we can find that and bring it to the world as best we can, then that's when we can truly look back at the end of our days and say, yes, I lived a beautiful life.
Nice.
So I'll share a poem that's also in the introduction of the book. It's called I Can Only Imagine, and it's kind of like my realization along the way that I've kind of been on a journey, I guess you could say, of my own salvation. Well, I'm using that term very liberally, but I realize a lot of my journey has been kind of this personal desire to know myself or to bring myself to the world. And I think this book is actually a realization that that needs to change now. I need to do more, step myself up to a higher level and really help more people bring themselves fully to life. And I've been doing that really through my coaching and my work along the way, but I don't think I fully realized that was more my mission. I don't think I fully realized before that saving myself was my first mission until I kind of got this. So here's the poem. It's called I Can Only Imagine. I can only imagine what my stolen eyes would see without artificial light, or how wide a net my heart would cast for safety. But what mostly bends my knee is the extreme improbability of it all. So I welcome the night as an open ear for prayer. I have two, one for the blessing of protection and another for the blessing of fortune. I've already painted my walls with answers while fasting in the desert of solitude. I've already unlearned a catalog of old ways and transferred my shadow crafts and shape-shifting skills into a worldly presence. Now the whispered voice tells me to follow a greater calling than my own salvation. Upon returning, I never expected a red carpet or flowers to blossom under my feet, only to live in the heartland of my own undiscovered country. And now to invite you to yours, only to live in the heartland of my own, and now to invite you to yours. I realized what happened is when I copied this over, it inadvertently inserted a second line after that. So I went on to read that. Only to live in my own heart, in the heartland of my own undiscovered country, and now to invite you to yours. So that's the last line. Could say, as we did on the poetry thing, end of poem. You know, they're nice. And a comment on that. In the 1970s, I worked in a crisis center. I was a crisis counselor for people who called in who were pondering taking their life, and my job was to help them get through that. And and there were some questions about death and dying on the wall from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death, called On Death and Dying. So I took these poems these questions and started answering them in my journal. And as I was struggling with these questions and answers, I realized I wasn't happy, wasn't satisfied with the answers I was coming up with. And then one night, as I was in the call center, one of the people that called in died. At that time, there were no cell phones or anything, and we could get we had an arrangement with a phone company that if somebody called in, we could track their phone number. So we had done that. We had tracked the number. We had gotten called 911. They got there, and actually the phone was still off the hook, and I could hear the recovery, the rapid response people trying to save this guy's life, and it failed. I could hear them say he's gone. So we lost him. And that night I came home and I was really struggling with this moment and all these questions that I'd had about death and dying, and I was unhappy with him. And I had this scene that occurred in my mind. It was almost like I was sitting across from death, playing a game of chess, which I think is actually a scene from Bergman, from a Bergman film. And I was unhappy with the game, and I knocked the pieces off. And then in my journal, I started this dialogue with death. You know, death dialoguing with me, actually. Death says, "Where are you?" And I realized in my imagination, I'm on a grave. He said, "Whose grave is it?" I realized it's my own grave. He said, "Where is the grave?" And I kind of look around, it's in a graveyard. He says, "Well, what place is this graveyard in?" And I told him, I don't know. And in the conversation, death came up with this assignment for me to go discover the land where my grave is in and find out who rules that land. And this story evolved in my journal. In the 1970s, I started writing this story, going out into this imaginary landscape to find out who ruled the land. I encountered all these interesting characters in this story inside, and learned that there was going to be a banquet in honor of the man at the castle. And eventually so that's where I have to get to, is the castle. And I get to this point in the story where I can see the castle, but between me and the castle on the path is this standing shadow figure. And I try to go around the shadow, but I can't. So I have to go into the shadow. So if you know anything about Jungian psychology, the shadow is, you know, our darkness inside and our negative judgments and all the issues. I believe it's also our grace and our dignity and our strength as well. But when I went into the shadow in the 1970s, writing my journal, all this terrible imagery and thoughts and feelings came, and I was frightened by that. And I actually stopped writing that story. So in 1977, I stopped writing that story. And then in 2006, 2007, I was going through a divorce. And of course, you're, you know, changing everything. And I found the journal where I'd written that. And through the years, I'd often thought, I got to go back, because it just was such an awful place in my mind that it ended. I thought it ended in this really awful scene. And so I went back and got that journal out, 2007, 30 years later. And I found that story and I read it, and it didn't end where I thought it ended. I thought it ended at this terrible scene. It ended where I was before this judge, and the judge was asking me questions. He said, you know, "What is your name?" And I said, "Nick LeForce," and he hits the gavel and says, "Wrong, you have no name." "Where were you born?" And I said, "Richmond, California." He hits the gavel and says, "Wrong, you have no birth." And then he starts showing me scenes from my life, and every scene, if I feel good about it or bad, whatever my feeling is, he goes, "Judgment made, judgment made." After several of these, finally he says, "Do you have anything to say for yourself? Like, do you have anything to justify your life?" And at the time in the story, what I wrote was, "No. But can I ask a question?" And he says, "Yes. You can ask one question, but be careful what question you ask, because your life depends on it." And that's where the story ended. I didn't realize that on some deep level for 30 years, I think my inner being was exploring, what is that one question I could ask that would save my life? What is that? And so what I did at that time in 2007 was I finished that story, which led into actually a trilogy of stories. And the reason I tell this is because I've had a very strong sense of this undiscovered country literally inside of me. In the book where I introduced the map of the Archetypal Journey, the center of that map, I call it the sanctuary. It's a place that you can go to where you can truly feel connected to yourself, a place you can go to and from which you can go out and explore those different areas of the map. And for me, that inner sanctuary is a garden, which I developed in my hypnotherapy practice, a sanctuary of a garden. But interestingly enough, that garden is part of this graveyard where my grave is, where I go to talk with death. And that's been my greatest advisor in life, actually, is death as a prompt to really ask me questions about life and what this adventure is about and how to live it well, and you know, how to sort of accept your mistakes and your flaws and the foolishness that we all do in life and walk through it with some degree of grace and dignity. And to me, that's what living a beautiful life is all about. And so that undiscovered country idea, that to me has a vivid, palpable reality to it. And I believe all of us have a vast expanse. It's almost like our ego, our conscious mind, is just one little player on this landscape. And there are lots of, it's populated by lots of other beings and creatures that we can learn from and interact with. And so the goal is, well, where is that heartland? The heart of that land. The word heartland actually means the part of a country that is considered to be its richest, most, most alive, most vital resource. Part of a country that is usually considered the most invulnerable. And so I love that idea of finding our own heartland and living from that place. So that's really what the book is about.
That's beautiful. I really enjoy that. I don't know if it's metaphorical or not, but just it almost feels very literal to me as this inner landscape, this inner space that, sometimes it's head space, where I'm thinking about things and assessing and evaluating and interpreting and so on. But then there's that heart space. And I love how you explore that in the book in terms of getting in touch with your intuition, your compassion, and how to have reason and or the head and the heart dancing together in a beautiful way as you move forward. So I appreciate that so much about this particular book. And anyway, Nick, I am looking at the time here. It's about 9:40. Mm-hmm. And would you like to share a little bit more from the book, or maybe open it up for questions at this point?
Yeah, I think let's open it up for questions. And I have other poems I could read from the book if that's something we'd like to do. But yeah, I'd like to open it up for questions. I notice everybody's on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourself, or have I drummed you into silence?
I was multitasking, I have to admit.
Yeah. That's what we all do in life. I think multitasking is a part of our modern world.
I wanted to ask you, because I think we've already started a dialogue, you and I, about what you're referring to as the shadow, mm-hmm. And the embracing of all of it. Do you find a fear or a revulsion in attempting to do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, when from my story that I told in the 70s, I got to that point where it would frighten me enough that I literally stopped writing that story at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think, I think that we make the demons in our mind scarier than they actually are. And usually if we are able to confront them or turn to them, it's like, when you're a child, all the monsters in the closet. But if you actually go look in the closet, there's no monsters there, And I remember when I was young, I used to have this experience. I had it a few times where I would be laying in bed at night, and my bed was against the wall, and I'd be turned on my side facing the wall. And I would get this idea in my mind that there was a monster in the room, and he was gradually walking over toward me. And the only thing I could do to save myself was to be absolutely still, as if I was dead. And literally, I'd be like almost holding my breath, afraid that this thing is going to come get me. And it happened a couple of times before this completely shifted it. But what happened is I would be there holding myself very still, and I could feel it getting closer and closer, almost like was leaning over me, breathing. I mean, almost like the breath was on me. And what I would do is I would get to this point where I would have to do something. And so I would literally, with all my energy, like flip up and around. Literally, my whole body would come up and flip around, boom. And then there'd be nothing there. But all that tension and all that, build up to that experience is, I think, what we do in a slower, you could say, more subtle way. Anytime we're dealing with that kind of shadow figure inside us, we're holding ourselves against what we fear it will do to us, rather than turning to face it. I did lucid dreaming for a while. So lucid dreaming is when you dream and you become aware that you're dreaming. So I had this practice, and I could get myself to lucid dream every once in a while. And one of them, I was dreaming, and then I realized I was dreaming at a point along the way. But I dreamed that this figure was coming toward me, and it was wearing a hood, and I could only see darkness where the face was. And as it got closer and closer, and I was scared, that's when I realized I was dreaming. And when I realized I was dreaming, I thought, oh, I'm dreaming. I could do anything I want, right? In a dream. And so I stood up and I reached over and just pulled this, it was like a skeleton face, pulled the face off of this, the skeletal face off of this figure in front of me. And then what it was just this opening that I could walk through. It was like a doorway into another place in life and into the world. And that's when I woke up, because I was so excited about stepping through the doorway. My excitement woke me up. But I remember that moment of, here's this thing that was frightened, that I was afraid was going to take me, was going to, death coming to get me. But when I took its face off, it became the doorway to a magical land. And I think that oftentimes our shadow figures have that quality. They come, they're frightening, they're the parts of ourselves we don't like, but they are the doorway to something if we can find the courage to face them and embrace them.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice question, thanks. I'll share another poem that's in the book that's called How We Become Human, which might be appropriate at this point in time. How we become human. We come for dreams, and to mend our hearts split along party lines. We may outreach ourselves, stretching for the stars, but underneath our bravery and our fear, what we want is always in our grasp. It is not a matter of choosing one or the other. This is how we become human. Every success comes with a measure of love, loss, and learning. If we are true, we inch along the path, widening the space in our hearts for compassion. One day we look in the mirror and all the faces of love look back at us. We can say, we have arrived, even though we know we are only temporary guests in the house. For me, I think the whole idea of undiscovered country, it changes the focus, which so many of us, I think, are taught we should have, which is self-mastery. We should be masters of ourselves. We should have self-mastery. I think that's a foolish goal. I think we should have self-mystery. We should really engage with ourselves as a mystery and open with curiosity and compassion to that mystery. And then, learn to engage with ourselves in a way that brings our best forth in the world. I have a deep feeling that our true nature is compassionate and is, I believe, I guess, in the goodness of us, even though we have a lot of evil, vile things happening in the world. And I think the goal for me is to get to the place where I can open myself to all of life from that place of a compassionate heart. In that sense, I'm probably more a Buddhist than anything else. Other questions? Comments? Random thoughts and feelings? Wild associations? Poetic intuition?
Good morning, Nick. It's Andy.
Oh, hi, Andy.
Hey. Yeah, having been recently retired, it's been kind of fun reinventing myself, exploring the artistic thoughts in my mind and sharing them with people. It's been great. It's been fun. It's been transformative.
Yes, I know your poetry has been coming out.
Yes, it's coming out. I'm enjoying it. Now, what interferes sometimes with that is what it kind of interferes with the joy is the impact of others negativity on me, and or my own scary monster in the closet thinking that there's something there when really there isn't. So I'm wondering if you've got anything that kind of how do you address, say, forgiveness in your poetry, or worry, or letting that stuff go?
Yeah, I think the first thing for me is I always try to welcome even the unwelcomed parts. It sounds funny, but it's almost in the field of NLP, one of leaders in that field is a man named Robert Dilts. And he talks about when there's something that comes up inside of us or in our world coming at us, you know, I think there are sometimes if something's in the outer world coming at us, we might need to take a stand against it, or we might need to, go around it in some way, or we might need to deal with it directly in some way. But I think the first step to being able to do that is welcoming what comes up inside of us. So if somebody has negative things they're saying that are coming at us, a lot of times those negative things are only a problem because they trigger something inside of us.
Right.
If it didn't trigger something inside of us, they would just be like water off a duck's back, it'd be like, oh, well, thank you for sharing your opinion. You're welcome to have yours. I'm welcome to have mine. But when it triggers something inside of us, then that lives within us. And that's where we have to confront that, because we can't, we go with ourselves everywhere. So the first step is kind of like, well, welcoming that part of me that has the criticism or that gets upset with myself and angry with myself, which I have done more times than I care to count in my life. But getting to the point where I can actually welcome that part. Getting to the point where, and what Robert says is, something needs to be heard or healed or held. Something needs to be heard or healed or held. And the way to interact with it is to get to a place where you can be genuinely curious. If you can be genuinely curious in the face of something that is troublesome, challenging, or difficult for you, then I think you have the chance of genuine transformation with it.
Thank you.
And a lot of my poetry is about, doing that with myself. A lot of my books are pretty confessional, as you might know from reading them. So I kind of deal with my own stuff, and one way to do it is that acceptance. So that in that map of the archetypal journey, that part of the map of the known inner self, all that stuff is what's known. When something comes, it's being made known to you. Your own negativity is being made known to you. Your own stupidity, doing something stupid, is being made known to you in that moment. And it's a part of yourself that, if you can interact with it, becomes a power in you.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Larry, I think we're getting close to the end of our time, so we should probably wrap this up. First of all, I want to say that the book is available on Amazon, so you can go there and get a digital version of it, either Kindle version, or you can get the physical copy. So I'd love it if you do that. Poets, there's a general idea that poets don't make money in the world, so support a poet. Larry, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, Nick, I just want to express my gratitude, one, for inviting me into this meeting to share this wonderful book with all of you wonderful folks that joined us. And I do highly recommend the book. It's a fabulous book. And it is something that, if you engage it, it is deep and rich with inner exploration of that undiscovered country. And so it's more than just a collection of poetry. It really is an opportunity for deep introspection and writing. And I think in this time when we're, most of us are staying at home and figuring out what to do with ourselves, this is a great resource to have in this time to do some inner work, some inner exploration, and at the very least, explore who you are. And then, once we emerge from this adventure, whatever the world looks like, you're going to meet it in a different place. And so, again, Nick, I so appreciate your work. I appreciate our friendship, and I really appreciate all of you that joined us today. And hope you enjoy the book.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Larry, for stepping up and doing this interview and for coming up with some great questions. I really appreciate that. And thank you all. It's been a real blessing to have you all join me here today. I look forward to seeing you in some context in the future. And with that, we'll call it a wrap.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the recording off.
Bye, folks.